All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give it a few minutes to let everyone join in, and then we'll get started. All right. We'll give it about another minute or so just to allow people to join in here.
I think they're slowing down, Maddie, if you want to kick it off.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We are going to talk about a very important topic that I'm sure a lot of you are no stranger to. We're going to start off with talking about navigating the new requirements and what you should know about backups and MFA. My name is Maddie. I'm an underwriter here. I feel like I recognize a lot of names on the list, but if you don't know me, now you do. And we also have Ellie on the webinar as well.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to get together again and talk about something that's incredibly important. A lot of this material is probably going to be stuff you've either not had to talk about before or are concerned about talking about in the future. So if I can give you one piece of advice, it's ask us, ask us, ask us, anything that pops into your head. Use the chat or the Q&A. We'll do everything we can to get everyone's questions answered in a timely manner today. And we will be doing follow-up webinars to make sure that everybody feels super comfortable and confident talking about both of these topics going forward.
Yes. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about our objectives today. So we're going to talk about first, we're going to do kind of a two-part. So we'll talk about MFA first, and then we'll talk about backups second. So we're going to do MFA and backups, an overview. We'll talk about why these security measures are so important for your insureds to have. Then we'll do a little bit of a discussion about how to implement and give you actionable steps on how to instruct your insured about MFA and backups. And then we'll talk about other notable security measures that you may not know of that our carriers are really looking for. And then lastly, we'll do a little question and answer session. So, jot all your questions down and feel free to use the live chat system. All right, so let's kick it off, Ellie. Tell us a little bit about what MFA is.
So multi-factor authentication, it's one of these hot phrases that we're hearing quite a bit in the cyber world, and it's really actually a bit more simple than one would think. I want everybody to sort of think about the times where they've been logging in to something, whether it be your banking system or your work computer, and it texts you a code that you have to then enter in to a website or to your device in order to allow you to pass. Now, you've already entered your username and password. This is a second level of security, which is why it's often referred to as two-factor authentication, because it's a second factor that's authenticating your presence and knowing that it's actually you. Think about it this way. If you are signing into something new and somebody else is also signing in as you into that something new, it already has your phone number or the app that it's supposed to send that code to. So if you get that code, but you aren't actually signing in, it's somebody pretending to be you. They won't have that code, and thus they will not be able to get in, even if they have your username and password. So each account needs to have this secondary layer of security to make sure that whomever is logging in or setting up a new device, which is a very common practice for multi-factor authentication, then they will have the second code, and that will be the only thing that will let them in. The second thing I want to touch on, Maddie, on this front is what specifically requires multi-factor authentication. So the most common places you're going to see multi-factor authentication and its requirements are going to be number one, first and foremost, email accounts. Email accounts should all have multi-factor authentication. Now, I know somebody's about to ask me, but I don't have to enter code every time I log into my email. True. Most multi-factor authentication is only when you're signing in for the first time with a new device or from a new browser. Again, imagine that email you get from Netflix every time your kid signs in on your account from a new location and it says, new sign in Cambridge, Maryland, and you go, okay, I've got a kid there, I'm not concerned. But if it said new sign in San Francisco, California, you would be concerned you don't have a kid there, or someone else who uses your Netflix password. And so that's your secondary authentication. You're able to kick somebody out, change your passwords quickly, et cetera, because it's letting you know that someone else is trying to access your account.
Right. Great points.
The only other thing I will say on this point before we move on is there are some other places where multi-factor authentication is important. If you keep data in the cloud, on a server, or anywhere where you're housing your data. For the people on this call, your agency management system, for example, that should also have multi-factor authentication so that anybody who's trying to log in for the first time from a new device or a new location has to get texted that code, or else they cannot get your client information. Very important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that great definition. Now let's talk a little bit about why your insured needs MFA and why this is so vital for a lot of carriers today.
I was watching a Microsoft webinar fairly recently on YouTube, and I thought it was fascinating because they said something like greater than 99% of all accounts that end up being compromised do not have MFA set up. They mean that from an email standpoint, but backups that are compromised or any kind of data stream or server or source is compromised. And it is so much more common for a cyber attack to occur when it deals with email through an account that does not have MFA. And now you guys understand why, because if you're getting that code and you're going to see when somebody else is trying to log in onto your account, you're going to be able to stop it. And we have seen an intense rise in cyber claims over the last year, particularly with regards to ransomware. And the easiest way for ransomware to get on your computer is through your email. So we really, really, really want to make sure that all accounts are protected because it's going to dramatically decrease the number of cyber claims we have and make businesses much less likely to have a cyber incident.
Okay, so Ellie, give us some actionable steps. How can we get this enabled?
Yeah, so there's lots of different services that you can use, but they all tend to follow the same pattern. You're going to work with your IT department or your outsourced IT person to make sure that at a minimum, MFA is turned on your email service, your Microsoft 365, for example. It's a setting, it's a single click. It will take your IT person or someone in your office less than 25 seconds to turn the button on for Microsoft Defender, which encompasses MFA and a number of other security measures. When you do turn that on, what it will do is the next time everybody logs in, it will require them to, in the case of Microsoft 365, use the Microsoft Authenticator app on your cell phone to get that code that you need to enter. Now, you'll only have to do it this first time. Anytime subsequently, unless you're setting up a new device or logging in from somewhere else, you will not have to enter that code. But anytime, again, you're setting up a new device and logging in from the web to outlook.com, for example, from trip abroad, then you'll need that authenticator code. Otherwise you won't. It's double checking to make sure the code that you enter is matching the one that they sent you. And if it does, you're good to go. And if it doesn't, it's giving you the opportunity to alert your IT department that you've got a problem. Is everybody with me so far? Please throw your questions in. I know this is kind of complicated. And while it sounds fairly simple, we want to make sure that everybody here can really talk about this with their customers, because it's very important for you guys to be able to explain why this is so important, why it's needed, and why they need to get it set up before they can get insurance. And then we'll get into the how. How do they do that?
Yes, great. It doesn't look like we have any questions so far. So let's talk a little bit about some more resources. What other apps can we use, and a little bit of tips for increased security on devices?
Absolutely. First off, let me just say we've got a one sheet. We'll send it to everybody after this that includes our specific instructions on how to turn on MFA for Microsoft 365 specifically. But you do have some options. There are a ton of um, apps for your phone that can be universal authenticators, meaning you can keep all your codes for all your different services in a single place. Mine, for example, will have our website to edit the actual website itself, our system, my email. The list goes on and on. There's like 6 different codes that I have at any given time on my Authenticator app. The most common ones you will see are going to be Google Authenticator, Authy, or the one from Microsoft, which is called Microsoft Authenticator. But again, there's tons and tons of options. None of them are better than others. It's whatever is easiest and fastest for you to set up. Now, let's talk about a few things that everybody can do in the interim to make this all go a little bit more smoothly. We have talked in the past about the importance of having complicated passwords. The problem with complicated passwords is we are not born to remember complicated passwords. I recommend a password manager. I use LastPass. 1Password is also excellent. I believe Maddie uses 1Password. We don't have any recommendations other than saying anything that you choose to use, and they're all free, is better than nothing. It allows you to have unique passwords for each of your logins, keep track of them, and it will remind you to update them if they're found in a data breach, if they are old, if they are too simple, etc. All right, what else? If you are in control of a data set, and this is one of those really interesting things that you guys can talk to your customers about specifically. If your customers house data or house different kinds of data, data should be what I like to refer to as siloed, meaning the only people who should have access to that data are the people that need to have access to that data. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're on our platform. We sell insurance from multiple insurance carriers. One insurance company's underwriters that needs to get into our system to do some underwriting cannot see any accounts that aren't specifically assigned to them for underwriting purposes and or that have anything to do with any other insurance company that we might work with. That is data siloing. It makes sure that admin accounts can see everything, everybody else cannot. We want to make sure that you're always updating your software. That is probably the single most important thing that you can do outside of having MFA to prevent cyber breaches. Anybody who's been on one of my webinars before knows I talk about this a lot, but security updates are almost always, software updates are almost always security patches, meaning they have found a problem and they're going in to fix it. And when that happens, you have to make sure that you are staying up to date with those patches that your systems are secure.
Great. So that kind of sums up MFA in a nutshell. Now let's get into backups and why your insured needs them.
Okay, backups are something I think everybody's a little bit more familiar with, but there are some terms and terminology I think we need to go over. So let's just start by saying a backup is a copy of your data. It's a snapshot in time, an earlier time, and it's an exact duplicate. You're going to hear a lot of your customers talking about the cloud as this like amorphous thing that is somehow magically going to keep their data safe. I don't really understand that. Basically, you can have backups and you can store them in any number of places, a server in your office, a server in a server farm, in the cloud, meaning multiple locations around the world. All of them are better than nothing. A flash drive with your data on it might be more secure than the cloud. We don't know. But the idea is as long as you have copies of your data, if anything bad should happen, you can get back to work faster because you take that copy and you add it to whatever software you're using, and all of a sudden, all of your data is back. This is incredibly important because it mitigates the risk of a lot of different kinds of cyber incidents. Ransomware attack being the most obvious, because if someone ransoms your data and tries to keep you out of it, the best thing you can do is be able to say, fine, get out of here. I got a copy. I'm not paying you $1. I'm going to take my copy. I'm going to set it up separately. And lo and behold, you're back to business. So that's your ideal situation, but data loss occurs. Sometimes software updates, for example, don't go well and it corrupts data. And this would prevent those things from happening as well, or at least having prevents them from having an outsized impact on the running of your business. All right, let's talk about this just in one more way to explain it. We will also be providing the slides for everybody in case you want to print off any of this stuff to give to your customers. The idea of a data backup is a separate location, stored copy of your data. And that way you can restore your data with that copy because it hasn't touched anything else. So there's a few key things here that we hadn't discussed before. And the biggest one is that if you keep, for example, a flash drive with all of your data on it, and you put the backup on that flash drive, that is not a backup. That is just a second copy of your data because it has to be in a secondary location so that if something happens with the first location, it doesn't matter, you're still going to have access to your data from the second. When I say location, it doesn't mean physically. For example, you can keep 2 servers in the cloud and one can have one copy and one can have another. Those are 2 separate locations, even though they're both technically in the cloud. Does that clear anything up? Any questions on what a backup is and how it works, or anything else we've discussed so far?
So far, I don't see anything. So let's talk about OneDrive. This is a really popular option for using to store backups.
So you're probably going to hear from some of your customers that they don't need a backup because they don't keep critical data. And I'm sure in some cases that might be sort of true, but you're always going to have emails and documents, physical documents, contracts, things like that, that you will need to keep a copy of. OneDrive is free. It comes with your Microsoft 365 subscription, and it essentially will create a copy of all of your files and documents within the Microsoft 365 universe and put them in a secondary location to create a backup. You can create folders for individual things, individual people within the organization, et cetera, et cetera. You can silo these things by users, again, so that it's not like everybody will have access to everybody else's private documents. But you can back up all of your files to OneDrive pretty easily, and it's just about as easy to set up as two-factor authentication is with 365. So I recommend it as a minimum first step for any businesses that are like, I don't need a backup. And when we say, yes, in fact, you do, this is a great first step to get them comfortable with the idea of backups. It is not, however, the easiest or the most comprehensive backup option out there. IT people are your go-to people on this. Make sure that they know and understand what these requirements are. You don't necessarily need to work with them directly, but you're going to have this checklist of MFAs and backups for certain services. And if you can hand that to the IT person, they can check off that they're done, and that's going to make sure that everybody is good and safe and available to get cyber insurance.
Yeah, so OneDrive isn't the only option. So let's talk a little bit about some other options. And again, we'll do a little bit of recap on some other security measures to consider in terms of backing up your data.
Yeah, we use iDrive. I like iDrive. It's incredibly simple. There's a quick link to it that we can provide for you just to get your customers up and running. Essentially, it runs itself on a daily basis to just copy everything that you tell it to. It's great service. It's incredibly cheap, and I recommend it. All of these others are also great. Carbonite is probably one of the larger in this space and tends to be something that people feel very confident in. But again, we don't care who they use. We only care that they use somebody in a secondary location. So some of these things that you need to know, just in case somebody asks, is, does it make a difference if backups are offline? That means like on a flash drive or a hard drive somewhere that's unplugged from the internet, versus online, which is like, for example, in the cloud or a secondary server. Which should you use, and is both an option? Both is definitely an option. It is highly preferred. We personally use both. That being said, most businesses don't necessarily need both. There isn't one preference over the other. Again, as long as they're in different places, you should be okay. Selling cyber as long as we have makes us a little paranoid. So we tend to go the extra mile on these things, but If anybody asks if it has to be an online backup, the answer is no, we're fine with an offline backup. In fact, they're quite secure because they're not attached to the internet. Here's a great one that I think is really important, and it sort of ties into our MFA conversation earlier, Maddie. When you are credentialing people to have access to your backups, meaning everybody should not have access to your backups, they should have a completely separate credential system, different login and password for backups than say for their email, because that's one of those things that if they get into your email, the first thing they're going to do is try to corrupt your backups if they can get in with the same username and login. You also need to make sure you're testing your backups. It isn't really enough to just have the backups in case of emergency. You need to check them every once in a while to make sure they're safe and in good quality and ready to go. So do that. And of course, regularly scheduled backups are really important. So I would always recommend that as well.
Yes, absolutely. All very important. And there are, if you have noticed on our newer application, our long application, we ask a few other questions that maybe you're not familiar with. Let's talk a little bit about some application terms you should know. Go ahead.
All right, well, let's start with role-based training. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like the silliest thing, but basically it's a lot of what we've talked about already. Your accounting department should have access to your accounting systems, not your whole systems. Each role within the organization should have training on what they should and shouldn't have access to, and who to notify in the instance that they are suddenly seeing access to more than what they should. That's what role-based training is. If anybody asks you about that, that's what you say. It's becoming more and more common to see role-based training for larger organizations in particular. The big one is RDP, or what is called Remote Desktop Protocol. That is where you log in to your desktop computer that is physically sitting in your office, but you're doing it from not your office, whether it be your laptop at home, a desktop at home. It often requires a VPN to access it, which is a virtual private network. We don't need to get into the specifics, except to say, if someone has remote desktop protocol, if a business allows people to remotely get into their actual computers that are physically sitting in the office, MFA is required for that remote desktop protocol. Think about it this way. Imagine you couldn't get into a customer to a person's email address because they had two-factor authentication turned on. But you use that same username and password and you try to log in directly into their desktop, which of course is going to have access to their email, to the entire computer systems within the office. If the two-factor authentication doesn't continue on to that, then it's completely useless. That being said, not every business is going to have RDP, or remote desktop protocol, but it is something that you might hear or that an applicant filling out the application might ask about, that you will now be able to say it's this. Endpoint detection and response solutions. This is a really technologically complicated way of saying it's checking to make sure no one's trying to get into your computer systems. There are common services, third-party service providers like Carbon Black Cloud and Windows Defender that you can turn on based on where your servers live to prevent people from trying to get into those servers. And these do that. If the company uses any one of these, there are several names specifically listed on the application, and they should know the names of that, but it's maybe one of those few questions that you pass on to the IT department. But just in case anybody asks, it's an intrusion detection system.
Great. Now, let's talk a little bit about some other security terms, specifically the SPF, the DKIM, the DMARC, some acronyms here that maybe people aren't familiar with.
We always get very frustrated with insurance companies because they don't read the room, might be the word I would use to describe this. We get the applications from the insurance companies and I always hand it to somebody who runs a business and I say, fill this out. And inevitably, every time we did, they would get to this question that asks if they use any one of these three specific services. And they'd be like, what is this? I don't know what this is. I don't use sunscreen. Get out of here. And And that's fair because these are not commonly identifiable words, and they are things that you should talk to your IT department about. And they are predominantly for your medium to larger sized accounts. You're really not going to see these on the little guys. That being said, they are a package. Each of these can be done together or separately. And each one of them are ways that you can secure your email account. For example, SPF, it tells you, okay, you can only send emails from a specific listed domain. If you're trying to send emails from not that domain, it won't allow them to send. That prevents spam from being generated from your computer, for example. And we can go on and on. You can read, I'm not going to read these to you, but the important thing in here is if your customer asks, it isn't a pick one situation. You can have all three of these, you can have one of these, two of these, or none of these. But they all do tend to work together to make email systems and email servers safer. So if a company has their own email servers, for example, this might be an area where you can talk to their IT department and really get some information. For your smaller customers who see this on an application, it's okay to tell them you probably don't have it, leave it blank. Okay.
Great. So that concludes our session today. I'd love to open the floor to anyone who has questions. We would be more than happy to answer them. I don't see any right now. So I do want to mention that we have a follow-up with One Step Security to learn more about some of these measures that we talked about and how you can help your clients get started. And we're going to put the Zoom registration link in the chat system here, so that you can sign up for that now and get your clients signed up as well.
I would also mention that this is our first time doing this webinar. We know how important being able to talk about these things is for you and your customers. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to be with you on each and every one of your customers' conversations in order to hold their hand through this with you. So what we want to do is make you feel empowered and armed with the information you need to talk to your customers and their IT people about this yourselves. This is not going to be the first time we do this. We're going to be doing this a lot more, but any feedback that you can give us on what we need to be clear about, simpler or more specific, that would be incredibly helpful, because we really do, as we do this for the next couple of weeks, once a week, and then in the future with third-party providers, we're going to be talking about this stuff all summer. We encourage you to join as many of these webinars as you want or that you feel confident in, and reach out to us independently, of course, if you have any questions. But it does look like some came in.
Yes, so it looks like I have a question. It's all about sending out the slides from the presentation. Absolutely, everyone on this session will get slides. So I will be sending out an email after this with all of that information, including the 2-1 sheet about MFA and backups, for everyone to view.
Ryan, it looks like, just asked a really great question. And this is probably the killer question. Is MFA now required for all policies going forward? The answer, Ryan, is yes. We work with several insurance carriers. Every single one of them has told us under no uncertain terms they will not quote any piece of business, new or renewal, if it doesn't have MFA at this point. We are sort of implementing that over the next 3 months on renewals that are already in our book of business. But otherwise, no new business that doesn't have MFA already set up. An interesting wrinkle, Ryan, to add to that, and everybody, is that we've had insureds come to us and say, we're 80% set up, we're 90% set up. Can we get the quote? No, they will not do it. You have to be 100% set up and certify it on an application. So if you get an application back from an insured and it says no to all the MFA questions, you got to go back to them and make sure they get the MFA set up, and then they have to fill out that app again with the MFA questions answered correctly before an insurance company will even take a look at it. It's insane, but we're going to help. We're going to help you with these webinars and trainings. We're even going to do a customer facing webinar. So in the end of July, early August, we're going to do some customer facing webinars where we're going to have a cybersecurity firm, and we're going to let you guys invite any one of your customers that you're concerned about will need to do this in order to get cyber insurance. And it will teach them what they need to know and how to talk to their IT departments and even offer consulting services if necessary. So have no fear. We're working on this with you, but please, any and all feedback is welcome at this point.
Yes, absolutely. I don't see any other questions, but again, if anyone has any follow-up questions or they can think of anything that didn't come to mind right away, we've got our email here, info@wingmanins.com. We also have our live chat feature that you're more than welcome to use right on our website in the bottom left-hand corner of our page. So if anyone has any further questions, they can use those as well.
Thank you for joining us, everybody. We'll catch you again next week where we do this all over again. And thank you, Maddie, for shepherding us through this complicating time.
Yes, absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.